The first time I heard it, I thought it was the pipes. A soft, wet clicking sound, somewhere beneath my ribs. Then my sternum shifted, and I realized the noise was coming from inside me.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
This is not a story about disease. It's not about hallucination. And it's not about fear of the unknown. This is about what happens when your own body stops obeying you. I host a medical podcast. I've interviewed surgeons, neurologists, pathologists, experts who have spent decades studying the human body. And now I am documenting something none of them can explain. My bones are moving. Not breaking, not cracking. Rearranging. And the X-rays prove I'm not alone inside my skin. Chapter 1. The sound beneath my ribs wasn't digestion. The studio was always cold after midnight. Not hospital cold, not winter cold, just the kind of artificial chill that seeped from vents no one remembered installing, settling into the leather chair and the foam panels lining the walls. The kind of cold that made breath feel heavier than it should. He liked it that way. The late-night slot demanded precision, silence, the soft mechanical hum of equipment and nothing else. Dr. Adrian Vale adjusted the microphone with careful fingers. His voice, measured, calm, authoritative, had become familiar to hundreds of thousands of listeners who fell asleep to his discussions of rare syndromes, unexplained diagnoses, and the quiet miracles of human anatomy. "Good evening," he began, leaning closer to the mic. "Tonight we're discussing benign fasciculation syndrome, why muscles twitch when we're tired, stressed, or overstimulated." His tone was clinical but warm, detached but intimate. He always recorded alone. That was important. The red ON air light glowed above the soundproof door. Outside the booth, the corridor lights were off. The building's other tenants had long since gone home. Just him, the faint hum of electronics, the steady cadence of his own breathing. He adjusted his posture, spine straight, ribs expanding slowly as he inhaled to continue. And that's when he heard it. A soft click. Not from the mic stand. Not from the desk. A wet, internal clicking. He paused. Just for a second. Listeners would assume he was consulting notes. Inside his chest, beneath his ribs, something shifted. Not painfully, not sharply. Precisely. His diaphragm fluttered involuntarily, and another sound followed, a faint grinding slide, as though two smooth stones had brushed together underwater. He cleared his throat. "Apologies," he said softly into the microphone. "That was unexpected." He leaned back slightly, pressing fingers into the left side of his ribcage. There was no pain. That was the first thing he registered. No stabbing, no ache, no burning. Just movement. It wasn't pain, he would later repeat. It was placement. He resumed speaking, voice steady. "As I was saying, muscle twitches are often benign. They feel alarming, but they're rarely dangerous." Click. This time it was louder. Close enough to the mic that the waveform would spike. He froze. The silence in the booth thickened. His listeners, accustomed to his seamless composure, would notice this pause. They would lean closer to their speakers. Inside him, beneath the sternum now, something rolled, like a knuckle being cracked from the inside. He swallowed. "Some joint noises," he continued carefully, "are caused by cavitation. Tiny gas bubbles collapsing within synovial fluid. It can sound like a pop or a click." His medical training activated like muscle memory. Categorize, identify, neutralize. He shifted in his seat deliberately, testing the theory. Nothing. He rotated his shoulders, rolled his neck. Silence. He pressed 2 fingers into his abdomen. The organ beneath his stomach felt normal, no cramping, no gurgling. Digestive noises were irregular, fluid, chaotic. This was rhythmic. Measured. Click. His breath hitched involuntarily. And this time the microphone captured it. The sound did not echo through the room. It came from within his thoracic cavity. A subtle internal alignment. He imagined cartilage adjusting, perhaps inflammation along the costochondral junctions, perhaps fatigue-induced muscle spasms causing rib displacement. He spoke again, softer now. Sometimes the body produces sounds when ligaments shift against bone. It can be startling. Another pause. Then, a faint dragging slide, like a drawer closing deep inside a cabinet. His hand shot to his chest. Under his palm, he felt a vibration, not a heartbeat but something structural, a subtle recalibration. It wasn't pain, he whispered. It was placement. He cut the recording. The silence after the red light blinked off felt heavier than the noise itself. For several seconds, he remained perfectly still, listening. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. The booth returned to its familiar stillness. He exhaled slowly, almost amused. Sleep deprivation. He'd been editing late all week. Cortisol levels elevated. Muscular tension can create internal noises amplified by heightened awareness. The mind, once alerted, can magnify ordinary sensations. He reached for his water bottle. As he lifted it, click, his grip faltered. This one came lower, beneath the ribs deeper. And with it, a sensation he could not immediately classify. Not discomfort. Not pressure. Repositioning. His breath grew shallow as his brain scanned possibilities. Peristalsis, no wrong location. Hiatal hernia, no pain, no reflux. Intercostal subluxation, that would hurt. This didn't hurt. It adjusted. He stood abruptly, chair scraping softly against the floor. Standing changed the sensation. A sliding shift downward, then a settling. He inhaled deeply. His lungs expanded smoothly. Heart rate normal. No dizziness. No nausea. Clinically, he was stable. And yet, the certainty forming in his chest was not medical. It was instinctual. Something inside him was not malfunctioning. It was reorganizing. He laughed quietly, a reflex against unease. "You're projecting," he murmured to himself. "You spend too much time talking about rare anomalies." He packed his bag slowly. As he opened the booth door, cool hallway air brushed against his face. The building was silent, but his body was not. With each step down the corridor, soft, measured clicks, like distant knuckles cracking beneath layers of flesh. He stopped walking. The sound stopped too. He took another step. Click. His throat tightened. The movement corresponded with motion, as though gravity influenced whatever was shifting inside him. He pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold tile floor. Breathing shallow now. Listening. Silence. His heart thudded, steady and loyal. But beneath it, something waited. The clinical part of his mind forced order into chaos. He would schedule imaging. Chest X-ray, possibly CT if indicated. He would document everything. Measure, observe, analyze. That was what he did. That was who he was. A narrator of anomalies. A translator of the body's secrets. But as he rose and walked toward the exit, the automatic lights flickering on ahead of him. Click. This one was louder. Closer to the sternum. A firm, decisive shift. He staggered slightly as a ripple passed through his torso. Not pain. Not injury. Alignment. It wasn't pain, he whispered again. It was placement. Outside, the night air felt different. Sharper. He inhaled deeply, and for a fleeting second he felt taller. Straighter. Balanced in a way he hadn't been before. As though some unseen architect had adjusted the scaffolding beneath his skin. He drove home in silence. No music. No podcast playback. Just the faint hum of the engine, and the memory of that internal click echoing in his mind. When he reached his apartment, he stood before the bathroom mirror. Studied himself. Nothing visibly wrong. Shoulders level. Collarbones symmetrical. Chest rising evenly. He placed both palms against his ribs. Waited. Minutes passed. Then, deep beneath his hands, a slow, deliberate shift. Something sliding into place behind bone. His reflection did not react, but his eyes widened. Because this time he felt it clearly. Not random. Not chaotic. Purposeful. And as he stood there in the dim bathroom light, breath shallow, heart steady, he understood something chilling in its simplicity. This wasn't digestion. This wasn't stress. And it wasn't imagination. Something inside him had begun to move. And it was not finished. Chapter 2. Doctors said it was stress. The X-ray said otherwise. Morning did not erase the sound. It softened it. Like a creature retreating deeper into a cave when daylight touches the entrance. Dr. Adrian Vale woke to pale winter light slipping through the blinds of his apartment. The city outside moved in its usual rhythm. Distant traffic, a garbage truck groaning somewhere below, the faint bark of a dog that had not yet accepted morning. He lay still in bed, hands resting lightly over his abdomen. Nothing. No clicking. No sliding. For several seconds, relief crept in warm and rational. Fatigue, he thought, heightened awareness, a body too long confined to a chair and a microphone. He rolled carefully onto his side. Click. The sound was muted by mattress and muscle, but unmistakable. Beneath his ribs, something adjusted. Not violently. Not randomly. Deliberately. His breath caught, but he did not panic. Instead, he observed. Heart rate slightly elevated, no dizziness, no sharp pain. It wasn't pain, he murmured to the empty room. It was placement. The phrase had become an anchor, a way to keep fear from spreading into abstraction. He showered slowly, steam fogged the mirror. Water ran down his chest in thin streams, tracing the subtle ridges of his sternum. He pressed 2 fingers along the lower costal margin, applying gentle pressure. Nothing felt misaligned. Nothing felt fractured. He raised his arms above his head. Smooth movement. No restriction. If anything, his posture felt improved. Straighter. Balanced. The observation unsettled him more than the noise. By noon, he was seated in an examination room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and printer toner. The paper covering the exam table crackled when he shifted. Across from him, Dr. Mira Sethi scrolled through his intake form on a tablet. She had known Adrian for years, colleague, occasional conference panel partner, someone who had once teased him for making pathology sound poetic. Clicking inside your chest, she repeated calmly. No pain. No. Shortness of breath. No. Palpitations. Normal sinus rhythm, as far as I can tell. She gave him a patient look. You know self-diagnosis is unreliable. I'm aware. She leaned back slightly. You've been under pressure, increased uploads, sponsorship contracts, sleep disruption. She tapped the tablet lightly. Stress manifests in strange ways. Intercostal muscles can spasm. fascia can shift, anxiety heightens somatic awareness. He expected that answer. He had almost rehearsed it himself. But even as she spoke, click, he stiffened. Her eyes flicked up. You felt something. Yes. Pain. No. He searched for the right word. Adjustment. She smiled gently. Muscle tension. She stood and pressed a stethoscope to his chest, cold metal against skin. Deep breath. He inhaled. Lungs clear. Heartbeat steady. She moved the stethoscope along his back, between shoulder blades. Again. Another breath. No abnormal sounds. She stepped away. Adrian, you sound perfectly healthy. He nodded slowly. I'd like imaging anyway. Her expression shifted, professional but slightly amused. For reassurance. For documentation. But hours passed. Hospitals have their own acoustics, rolling carts, muted conversations behind curtains, the distant mechanical thrum of unseen machines. He sat in radiology, wearing a thin gown that tied loosely at the back. The fabric smelled faintly of bleach. Across the hall, an elderly man coughed into a tissue. A child laughed somewhere far away. Life continuing. Ordinary. He stepped into the imaging room when called. The X-ray technician, a young man with tired eyes and steady hands, positioned him carefully. Chin up, shoulders forward. Adrian complied. Deep breath and hold. The machine emitted a low hum. He held still. And in that stillness, click, subtle, internal. He did not move. The hum stopped. Okay, the technician said casually. You can breathe. Adrian exhaled slowly. Did you hear that? He asked. Hear what? Nothing, Adrian replied. Minutes later, he stood beside Dr. Sethi in a dim viewing room. The X-ray glowed on the screen, white bones suspended in shadow. He had seen thousands of images like this. He knew what normal looked like. And at first glance, it appeared normal. Ribs arcing evenly, clavicles symmetrical, spine aligned. Dr. Sethi zoomed in slightly near the lower left ribcage. There, she said. He leaned closer. Just beneath the 10th rib, faint and barely perceptible, was a thin, irregular line. Not a fracture, not calcification, more like density. Artifact distortion, she said lightly. Sometimes the machine catches motion or overlapping structures. Motion, he asked. You might have shifted. I didn't. She gave him a look. Everyone shifts. He stared at the screen. The irregularity was subtle enough to dismiss. But it wasn't random. It followed a curve, a shape that did not belong to any known bone. Can we compare to previous imaging? He asked. She hesitated. You haven't had a chest X-ray in, what, 5 years? 6. Artifacts happen, she repeated. The word lingered. Artifact. Something that appears real but is. Something produced by error. He nodded slowly. Schedule a follow-up in a week, he said, just to confirm. She agreed, mostly to reassure him. As he dressed, he felt oddly calm. The evidence was inconclusive. Explainable. Dismissible. But as he stepped into the hallway, click. This time sharper. Deeper. As if responding to scrutiny. He paused near the elevator. Pressed fingers into the exact location of the irregularity. Beneath skin and muscle. A faint resistance. Not a lump. Not swelling. Structure. He withdrew his hand. Artifacts don't grow between scans, he whispered under his breath. The phrase came unbidden. It felt like a rule, a law of reality. Artifacts do not evolve. They do not adjust. They do not respond. That night, he returned to the studio. The red on air light glowed once more. He sat down, posture impeccable. He began recording. "Today I underwent imaging," he said calmly. "Preliminary results suggest no immediate concern. Minor distortion beneath the rib cage, likely motion artifact." He allowed a faint, self-aware chuckle. "Artifacts," he repeated. And as he said the word, click, louder than before. The microphone picked it up clearly this time. A sharp internal snap, followed by a dragging slide. His breath faltered. He did not cut the recording. He let the silence stretch. Listeners would hear it. They would rewind. They would analyze. He swallowed. "It wasn't pain," he said softly into the mic. "It was placement." Beneath his ribs, something settled. And for the first time, he felt pressure. Not outward. Inward. As though something new had taken root along the inner curvature of his skeleton. The session ended abruptly. But as he sat alone in the dim booth, the realization crystallized slowly, like frost creeping across glass. If it was an artifact, it would not be there next week. If it was stress, it would not respond. If it was imagination, the microphone would not have heard it. He pressed his palm flat against his ribcage. Waited. Minutes passed. Silence. Relief began to bloom. Then, deep beneath bone, a deliberate shift. Closer to the spine now. Expanding. Quiet. Measured. And as he walked out of the studio into the long, fluorescent hallway, he understood something with terrible clarity. If the irregularity appeared again next week, slightly larger, slightly denser, then it was not distortion. Because artifacts don't grow between scans. But something inside him was. Chapter 3. My spine clicked back into place on its own. At 3:17 a.m., the city was at its most honest. No traffic. No voices in neighboring apartments. Just the low electrical hum of appliances and the distant, uncertain sigh of wind against glass. Adrian Vale woke without knowing why. His bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:17. For several seconds he lay still, suspended between sleep and awareness. His body felt heavy, pinned beneath the blankets. Then he felt it. A deep pressure at the base of his spine. Not sharp, not immediate. Slowly increasing. As though something inside him had been waiting for stillness. He drew a careful breath. The pressure intensified. Then, a violent internal crack. The sound was not external. It did not echo in the room. It erupted from within him. A grinding cascade traveled upward along his spine, vertebrae snapping into alignment one after another like a row of dominoes collapsing in reverse. CRK. 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 His back arched involuntarily. Air burst from his lungs in a hoarse gasp. It wasn't pain. It was force. A deep structural shift, powerful enough to make the mattress tremble beneath him. He clutched at the sheets as the movement continued upward, lumbar to thoracic to cervical. And then, a final, decisive snap at the base of his skull. Silence. The pressure vanished instantly. Replaced by something worse. Relief. Not the gentle easing of tension after a stretch, but a profound, mechanical recalibration. His spine felt straighter. Longer. He lay there trembling, eyes wide in the dark. It wasn't pain, he whispered to the ceiling. It was placement. He rolled cautiously onto his side. No resistance. No stiffness. His back felt newly constructed, as if someone had dismantled him and rebuilt him with better parts. Slowly he sat up. The room tilted slightly, not from dizziness, but from altered perspective. He felt taller. The top of the bedroom doorframe looked closer than it had the night before. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood. No instability. His posture locked naturally into alignment. Shoulders back. Chin level. He walked to the bathroom, each step measured. The hardwood floor felt cooler than usual. The air thinner. He flipped on the light. His reflection stared back at him. At first glance unchanged. But something about the angle of his shoulders was different. His collarbone sat higher. His neck elongated. He leaned closer to the mirror. Under the bathroom's sterile light, his skin looked pale, stretched faintly taut across his frame. He turned sideways. His spine, visible in subtle ridges beneath skin, appeared unnaturally straight. He bent forward slightly, testing flexibility. His back moved smoothly. No grinding. No pain. And yet, deep inside, beneath muscle and bone, he felt an echo. A memory of motion. Like machinery cooling after heavy use. Hours passed. Though outside, the night stayed the same. He did not return to bed. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at nothing, replaying the sensation in clinical detail. Lumbar adjustment first. Ascending alignment. Cervical lock. The sequence was too organized to be spasm. Too symmetrical to be injury. He considered scoliosis correction, spontaneous realignment, impossible without trauma. He considered sleep paralysis hallucination. But hallucinations do not leave structural aftermath. When dawn finally thinned the darkness, he dressed slowly and drove to the studio. The booth welcomed him with familiar silence. Foam panels, red ON air light, the faint metallic scent of electronics warming. He sat down carefully. For the first time since the clicking began, he felt no anticipation. No waiting. Just quiet. He began recording. Last night, he said evenly, my spine adjusted itself. He described the sequence calmly. Listeners would assume exaggeration. They always did when episodes veered personal. He allowed the microphone to capture his breathing. Vertebrae do not spontaneously realign, he continued, not without force, not without external manipulation. Click. Soft. Low. Somewhere beneath the thoracic region. His hands tightened around the desk. It wasn't pain, he said again. It was placement. He paused. Then something occurred to him. He minimized the recording window and opened his live comment feed. Notifications had multiplied overnight. Unusual for an off-schedule upload. He scrolled. Dozens of messages. Timestamps. 3:17 a.m. 3:17 a.m. 3:17 a.m. He frowned. He opened the previous night's episode file. Dragged the timeline to 3 hours and 17 minutes into the stream. There it was. A sharp internal crack captured by the mic. Followed by silence. And in the chat replay. Confusion. Did you hear that? What was that sound? Is that part of the story? His pulse quickened. He opened emails. More messages. Listeners reporting that they heard a bone pop during the episode. Some laughing. Some unsettled. But a handful described something else. They claimed they felt something. At 3:17 a.m., a pressure in their backs, a sudden internal shift. He stared at the screen, a cold sensation creeping up his newly aligned spine. Coincidence? Mass suggestion? Parasocial influence? When an audience expects something strange, they reinterpret normal sensations as meaningful. He knew this. He had discussed it in past episodes. The psychology of contagion. But as he leaned back in his chair, his spine moved again. Not violently, not dramatically, just a subtle downward slide, as if testing its new structure. And he realized something chilling. The adjustment at 3:17 had not corrected an injury. It had created space. By afternoon, he visited a chiropractor under the guise of routine maintenance. The man examined him briefly. "Your alignment is excellent," he said. "Honestly, better than most patients." "Any signs of recent adjustment?" Adrian asked carefully. The chiropractor shook his head. "If anything, I'd say your posture improved recently." Improved? He left the clinic unsettled. As he walked down the sidewalk, he noticed something else. His stride was longer. Effortless. His body moved as if calibrated, balanced with mechanical precision. And beneath it all, a faint internal ticking. Not random clicks, but subtle calibrations, micro-adjustments, like something tightening bolts inside him. That night, as he prepared for bed, his inbox filled again. More timestamps, more listeners reporting strange back sensations during his episodes. A pattern forming. 3:17. He stared at the clock. 2:58 a.m. He remained awake, waiting, listening. The room held its breath. 3:10. Nothing. 3:14. Silence. 3:16. His muscles tensed. Anticipation coiled tight in his chest. He almost laughed at himself. Then, 3:17. His spine did not crack. It shifted. Slowly. A smooth internal glide downward. No violence this time. No cascade. Just a measured correction. And in the quiet of his bedroom, he felt it clearly. Not random. Not chaotic. Purposeful. As though something inside him had tested a new framework the night before. And tonight, it refined it. He closed his eyes, heart steady but mind racing. Because the messages were still coming in. More listeners. More timestamps. And if the pattern continued, if the next episode triggered another wave, then this wasn't isolated. It wasn't stress. It wasn't imagination. Something inside him was not only rearranging itself, it was synchronizing. And at 3:17 a.m., as his spine settled into unfamiliar perfection, he understood the next terrifying possibility. What if it wasn't just building inside him? What if it was spreading through sound? Chapter 4. The second skeleton appeared in fragments. Hospitals have a particular silence at night. Not true silence, never that. There is always the distant hiss of oxygen, the low murmur of nurses at a central station, the soft rhythmic beeping of machines keeping count of fragile lives. But beneath those sounds lies something else. Anticipation. Adrian felt it the moment he stepped through the sliding glass doors for his follow-up scan. The air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with disinfectant and overheated wiring. Fluorescent lights washed the corridor in sterile white, flattening shadows but never quite erasing them. He checked in without speaking much. The receptionist recognized him. "You're back sooner than expected," she said casually. "For reassurance," he replied. He used the word carefully. Reassurance. Not verification. Not confirmation. The waiting room felt colder than before. A television in the corner played muted daytime talk shows. A man in a construction jacket coughed intermittently into his sleeve. Somewhere down the hall, a child whimpered and was gently hushed. Adrian sat perfectly upright. His spine no longer ached. It did not need to. It felt engineered. He placed one hand over the lower left side of his ribcage. Stillness. Then, a faint internal shift, like something pressing outward gently, testing boundaries. It wasn't pain, he murmured under his breath. It was placement. His name was called. The imaging room felt tighter this time. Or perhaps he felt larger inside it. The radiology technician from before stood beside the machine, adjusting settings. His expression was neutral, but something in his posture had changed. Less casual, more precise. Same procedure, the technician said. Adrian nodded and positioned himself against the cold plate. Deep breath and hold. The machine hummed. He held still. Completely still. He did not move. He did not swallow. He did not blink. And yet, click, soft, internal, a measured slide beneath his ribs. The hum ended. You can breathe. The technician did not speak further. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then longer still. Adrian noticed the silence. Something wrong? He asked calmly. The technician hesitated. I'm going to run another angle. Why? Just protocol. He repositioned Adrian slightly, rotating him a few degrees. The machine hummed again. Adrian felt it this time. A deeper movement. Not along the surface of bone. Beneath it. A faint spreading sensation, like branches extending through soil. The scan finished. The technician didn't smile. He didn't offer casual reassurance. Instead, he stepped out of the room briefly, leaving Adrian alone with the low mechanical ticking of cooling equipment. Minutes passed. Though outside, the hospital continued breathing. When the technician returned, he avoided eye contact. Radiology wants additional imaging, he said. Additional. Higher resolution, CT. Why? A pause. Just to clarify distortion. The word landed heavily. Artifact. Distortion. Harmless explanations. But Adrian could feel it. Whatever had appeared faintly before was no longer faint. The CT scanner room felt cavernous. White walls curved inward like the inside of a shell. The machine itself waited in silence, an enormous circular aperture designed to see through flesh and into structure. He lay on the narrow table, hands folded across his chest. Above him, the ceiling tiles were arranged in perfect grids. Order. Predictable. Hold still, the technician said from behind glass. The table slid forward. The machine began its rotation. A mechanical whirl surrounded him. Inside his body, something responded. A low vibration started near his sternum. Then spread. Not chaotic. Organized. As if the internal structure recognized it was being observed. The first rotation completed. The machine paused. Then resumed. And in the quiet hum between cycles, Adrian felt it distinctly. A subtle outward pressure along his ribs. Not pushing against skin, but expanding beneath the existing bone. Like scaffolding rising behind walls. It isn't replacing me, he thought. It's assembling itself. The phrase arrived fully formed. Clear. Cold. The scan ended. He was wheeled back into the corridor and told to wait. This time he wasn't alone long. Dr. Sethi entered the consultation room carrying a tablet. Her expression was carefully neutral. Too carefully. "We noticed something," she began. He didn't respond. She turned the tablet toward him. The image glowed in grayscale precision. His familiar skeleton, ribs arching like white parentheses. And beneath them, faint, thin, curving lines, denser than soft tissue, less dense than bone, following the natural shape of his ribcage, but slightly offset, like a duplicate drawn beneath tracing paper. He leaned closer. "That wasn't there before," he said quietly. "It may have been too subtle to detect." She zoomed in. The lines intersected near the spine. Branching. Structured. "This could be calcification," she offered. "Some rare connective tissue disorder." "Calcification is irregular," he interrupted softly. "Chaotic, this is patterned." She didn't argue. Her silence confirmed what words could not. They both saw it. The faint beginnings of structure. "It isn't replacing me," he whispered. "It's assembling itself." Dr. Sethi's eyes flicked up. "What?" "Nothing." She swallowed. "We'd like to admit you for observation." "For how long?" "Until we understand what we're seeing." He nodded slowly. He should have felt fear. But instead, he felt anticipation. Because deep beneath his ribs, he felt something settle. As though acknowledged. As though satisfied. That night in a hospital bed under dim lighting, Adrian lay awake. Monitoring wires clung to his chest. A plastic ID band circled his wrist. The room smelled faintly of saline and recycled air. Beyond the thin curtain, another patient snored softly. He stared at the ceiling. Waiting. At 3:17 a.m., the clock on the wall ticked forward. Nothing happened. No violent cracking. No dramatic shift. Just a subtle internal tightening. A small, precise adjustment along the inside of his ribcage. He exhaled slowly. The new lines on the scan replayed in his mind. They were no longer distortions. No longer artifacts. They had direction. Purpose. And as he lay there in the sterile quiet, he felt a second rhythm inside him. Not a heartbeat. Not a pulse. But something structural. Growing. Measured. Patient. And somewhere deep in the hospital's lower levels, machines continued to hum. Recording. Imaging. Documenting. But none of them could capture the most important detail. Because the faint lines beneath his ribs were no longer faint. They were thickening. Extending. Reaching upward toward his sternum. Toward his spine. Toward completion. And as Adrian finally closed his eyes, he understood the terrifying truth that no scan could soften. This wasn't an error. This wasn't disease. This wasn't decay. It was construction. And it had only just begun. Chapter 5. My organs no longer sit where they used to. Hospitals measure life in millimeters. A tumor the size of a pea. A clot barely visible on a scan. A shadow no wider than a fingernail that can determine how much time someone has left. So when the radiologist said, "It's only a few millimeters," he meant it as reassurance. But Adrian knew better. Millimeters are how evolution begins. The MRI room was colder than the CT suite. The air felt denser, metallic, thick with the faint scent of ozone. The machine waited like a hollow tunnel carved through bone-white walls. Its circular mouth seemed almost organic, an enormous eye prepared to look inward. Adrian lay flat on the sliding table. The hospital gown scratched lightly against his skin. A technician positioned pads around his torso and gave the standard instructions. "Hold still, it'll be loud." Loud was an understatement. The machine began its rhythmic hammering, metallic pulses that echoed through the chamber like distant construction. Construction. The word made something stir beneath his ribs. He kept his eyes closed, focused on breath. Inhale, exhale. But as the magnets thudded around him, he felt it. A slow internal settling. Not bone this time. Softer. Deeper. His stomach shifted faintly downward. His diaphragm tightened and then released. Something near his heart pressed outward, then withdrew. The sensation was subtle. If he hadn't been listening for it, he might have mistaken it for nerves. It wasn't pain, he reminded himself. It was placement. The scan lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes of mechanical thunder and quiet internal rearrangement. When it ended, he felt different. Not injured. Not weakened. Repositioned. Dr. Sethi did not look relieved when she entered the consultation room. She closed the door carefully behind her. On the monitor, 2 images glowed side by side, one from 6 years ago, taken during a routine exam after a minor car accident. And the new one. "Your skeletal changes are progressing," she began carefully, "but that's not the only difference." She zoomed into his chest cavity. His heart. On the older scan, it sat slightly left of center, as expected. On the new scan, it sat further left. Only slightly. A matter of millimeters. But undeniable. That could be positioning, she offered. Breathing differences, scan angle. Compare diaphragm placement, Adrian said quietly. She did. The diaphragm had lowered slightly. The liver, normally nestled snugly beneath the right ribcage, had rotated subtly, angling more inward than downward. His stomach curved differently. Small changes. Precise. Coordinated. "This resembles," she began slowly, "certain congenital anomalies. Situs inversus, for example, organs mirrored from birth." "But I wasn't born like this," Adrian said. "No. Situs inversus is complete reversal," he continued clinically. "This is selective." She didn't argue. The room felt smaller now. The fluorescent light hummed faintly overhead. "What about masses?" he asked. No tumors, no obvious growths. But the faint lines beneath his ribs, those secondary calcified structures, had thickened. And now they appeared to cradle his displaced organs. Supporting them. Guiding them. "It isn't replacing me," he murmured. Dr. Sethi looked up. "What?" "It's assembling itself." She didn't respond, because she saw it too. Back in his hospital room, Adrian sat upright in bed. The IV line had been removed. He insisted on minimal intervention. He wanted clarity. Silence. Control. But control was becoming theoretical. As afternoon light faded beyond the narrow window, he felt the first emotional spike. Anxiety. Not panic. Just a subtle tightening in his chest as he replayed the scan in his mind. And with that emotional rise, his body responded. A deep, slow settling sensation rippled through his abdomen. His liver shifted slightly upward. His heart thudded once, harder than necessary, then adjusted. He inhaled sharply. The movement stopped. He exhaled. Another faint slide. He froze. It was reacting. Not randomly, but in response to internal states. Emotional stress triggered adjustment. He laughed softly, almost breathless. Adaptive, he whispered. The word tasted wrong. Hours passed. Though outside, the sky darkened into a flat, indifferent black. Visitors had left. Hallway lights dimmed. Nurses' footsteps softened. Alone in the half-lit room, Adrian stood and walked slowly to the mirror above the sink. He pressed his palm to his chest. Heartbeat steady, but slightly more left than it used to be. He leaned forward. He could feel the empty space beneath his right ribcage more distinctly now. His internal geography was changing. Not violently. Strategically. He thought of rare conditions. Situs ambiguous. Heterodoxy syndromes. Organs misarranged from birth. But those were chaotic errors in embryonic signaling. This was not chaos. This was design. A millimeter here. A slight rotation there. And always accompanied by the faint internal clicks of reinforcement. He splashed water on his face. Cold droplets traced down his cheeks. His reflection stared back, calm, intelligent, composed. But something in his posture had shifted again. He stood taller, straighter, balanced around a new center. A center that was no longer anatomically standard. His phone buzzed softly on the bedside table. A message, then another, then several more. Listeners. They were sending updates. Some reported chest pressure during episodes. Some described feeling their heartbeat move. One message read, I swear my heart skipped and then hit from a different angle. Is that normal? Adrian stared at the text. The room felt colder. If this were psychosomatic contagion, it was remarkably specific. Millimeters. Angles. Settling sensations. He typed a response, then deleted it. He did not want to influence interpretation. He wanted data. He lay back down. At 3:17 a.m. the clock ticked over. Nothing dramatic happened. No violent crack. No cascade. Instead, his heart shifted again. A smooth, deliberate slide further left. He felt it. Not as pain, but as relocation. His lungs expanded around the new position. His ribcage adjusted subtly to accommodate. And beneath it all, the secondary skeletal lines thickened. Supporting. Stabilizing. He placed his hand flat against his chest. This isn't inversion, he whispered. It's construction. Because inversion would mirror. This was selective. His heart was not swapping sides entirely. It was moving toward a better fit. Toward something optimized. Toward alignment with the emerging structure beneath his bones. As sleep finally pulled at him, one final sensation traveled through his abdomen. A gentle downward slide of his stomach. A quiet internal correction. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since this began, he felt complete. Not whole, but closer. And somewhere deep inside his chest cavity, beneath the original skeleton, the new framework tightened its hold. Because organs do not wander. They do not drift without cause. They are held in place by ligaments, fascia, structure. Unless something new is building the structure they were always meant to fit inside. And as the hospital settled into its uneasy silence, Adrian's body made one final, nearly imperceptible adjustment. Just a millimeter. But in anatomy, a millimeter is everything. And whatever was assembling inside him was almost ready for the next phase. Chapter 6. Listeners started hearing it in themselves. The first email arrived at 4:02 a.m. Subject line. I think it's happening to me too. Adrian was still awake when it came in. Hospitals measure time differently at night. The fluorescent lights hum without mercy, and even when patients sleep, the building never truly rests. It breathes in machinery and exhales antiseptic. He lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, when his phone vibrated against the metal tray beside him. He almost ignored it, but something inside his ribcage shifted gently. Encouraging. He opened the message. The sender claimed to be a long-time listener, a nursing student, logical, skeptical, not prone to hysteria. She described binge listening to his last 3 episodes during an overnight study session. At exactly 3:17 a.m., she wrote, she felt a deep internal click beneath the left rib. Not painful. Like something lining up, she said. He stared at the phrase. Lining up. Not breaking. Not tearing. Aligning. His thumb hovered over the screen. Another email arrived. Then another. By 4:10 a.m. there were 12. All referencing the same timestamp. All describing internal sounds. Soft clicks. Wet knocks. Subtle internal shifts. Different cities. Different time zones. One listener from overseas reported hearing the sound at 3:17 in their local time, not his. That detail made his skin prickle. He sat up slowly in bed. The IV port in his arm tugged slightly as he moved. Deep beneath his ribs. A faint adjustment. Not dramatic. Just acknowledgement. It isn't replacing me, he whispered. It's assembling itself. And maybe it wasn't assembling alone. By morning, his inbox was flooded. Social media messages poured in. Voice notes, videos, confused, nervous laughter. He requested audio submissions. Part of him hoped to disprove the pattern. Mass suggestion was powerful. When an audience expects something, they reinterpret ordinary bodily sensations as meaningful. He had spoken about this before, the psychology of shared delusion. But data mattered. Evidence mattered. By noon, the first files arrived. Cheap microphones, phone recordings, laptop audio. Most were static and breathing. Then he heard it. A faint internal click. Captured accidentally while someone was adjusting their headset. He replayed it. It was subtle. Wet. Structural. He froze. It matched the frequency profile of the sound captured in his own recording. Another clip. This one louder. A dull internal knock followed by a sharp inhale. The sender whispered, "Did you hear that?" He did. His pulse slowed instead of quickening. This wasn't hysteria. It wasn't uniform imagination. The sounds had texture. Weight. Intent. He opened a waveform analyzer. Compared his own 3:17 recording to the listener submissions. The peaks aligned. Not identical, but similar in tone. Organic. Internal. He leaned back in his hospital bed, phone resting against his chest. And beneath his palm, something shifted. A subtle tightening beneath the new skeletal framework. As if reacting to the external confirmation. By late afternoon, nurses began noticing his unusual stillness. "You're very quiet today," one remarked gently. "Listening," he replied. That was the truth. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. He was observing. Cataloging. Waiting. As the sun dipped below the hospital skyline, messages continued to multiply. Some listeners described nothing more than a single click. Others reported a second event the following night. A few mentioned posture changes. Standing straighter without trying. Back pain gone. Breathing feels different. One message stood out. A middle-aged man wrote, "I didn't believe you. I thought it was just storytelling. But last night, after listening with headphones, I felt something settle inside my chest. Not painful, just right." Adrian read that sentence 3 times. Just right. He placed his hand against his sternum. His heart now beat further left than it once had. His liver angled inward. His stomach sat slightly lower. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing fatal. Just right. At 3:17 a.m., he remained awake again. The hospital hallway outside was nearly silent. A distant cart squeaked once, then faded. His phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. He refreshed his inbox. More messages. More timestamps. 3:17. He watched the clock shift. 3:16. The room held its breath. 3:17. He waited for violence. For the cracking cascade from Chapter 3. For dramatic realignment. Instead, a soft internal click beneath his ribs. Gentle. Measured. Followed by a wave of warmth through his abdomen. He exhaled slowly. And then, his phone vibrated. A live notification. A listener had just posted. It happened again. 3:17, I heard it. Another. My girlfriend heard it too. Another. Why does it feel like it's sinking? He closed his eyes. There it was. The word he had avoided. Sinking. This was no longer isolated anatomy. It was rhythm. A pattern tied to attention. To listening. To awareness. Once you hear it, he whispered in the dark hospital room, it begins. The phrase felt heavier than the others. More dangerous. Because it implied activation. He opened one final audio file. A young man's nervous breathing filled the speaker. Then, a wet internal knock. Louder than the rest. Followed by the man's whisper. Oh no. Adrian replayed it again and again. Each time, he felt a corresponding tremor beneath his own ribs. Not mirrored. Responding. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. By dawn, the hospital corridor flickered back to life. Nurses changed shifts. Monitors beeped in polite succession. But Adrian had not slept. He had listened. He had cataloged. He had begun mapping timestamps across regions. The pattern was undeniable. It occurred when listeners engaged deeply. Headphones. Late at night. Silence. Focus. Sound as entry point. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood. No dizziness. No weakness. His posture felt perfectly aligned. Balanced in a way that made ordinary stance feel primitive. He walked to the mirror again. His reflection seemed subtly different. Straighter. Centered around a new axis. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of something resembling guilt. He had invited them. Into the silence. Into the listening. Into the rhythm. He had told them about the clicking. He had described the placement. And now, they were hearing it too. He placed his hand against his chest. Beneath bone and muscle. A faint, satisfied tightening. As if the structure inside him approved of the expansion. Approved of the distribution. Once you hear it, he said softly to his reflection, it begins. And somewhere across the city. Across the country. Across the world. Hundreds of listeners sat in dark rooms with headphones pressed close. Waiting for 3:17. Listening for the click. Unaware that anticipation itself was the trigger. because whatever was assembling inside Adrian Vale was no longer confined to his skeleton. It had found a medium, and sound was only the beginning. Chapter 7. Something inside me is building for weight. The human body is not built for stillness. It is designed for pressure, for gravity, for bearing weight. Adrian began to notice the change on a Tuesday morning. He had been discharged from the hospital 2 days earlier under the vague classification of continued outpatient observation. The scans had shown progression, yes, but nothing immediately fatal, nothing that justified confinement. Medicine prefers emergencies. This was evolution. His apartment felt smaller when he returned. The ceiling lower. The doorframes narrower. Not physically, but perceptually. He stepped inside and paused, letting the silence settle around him. The faint hum of his refrigerator, the distant traffic below, the dry smell of dust and paper from his bookshelf. Home. He set his bag down and stood still in the center of the living room. Balanced. Perfectly balanced. He closed his eyes. Inhale. Exhale. He leaned forward slightly, testing his equilibrium. His body corrected instantly. Effortlessly. No microwobble, no muscular strain. It was as if an internal gyroscope had been installed somewhere beneath his spine. It wasn't pain, he murmured softly. It was placement. But this was something more. This was reinforcement. Over the next several days, he began documenting subtle physical improvements. His posture required no conscious effort. His shoulders rested back naturally. His spine remained upright even during long recording sessions. His breathing felt deeper, expanding through his chest in a wider arc. And strangest of all, his center of gravity felt lower. Grounded, as though something inside him had redistributed mass. He tested it deliberately, standing on one foot in the kitchen. No wobble. He bent to lift a heavy box of archived recording equipment he had been meaning to sort through. Normally, he would feel strain along his lower back. This time, nothing. The weight felt manageable, balanced through him rather than against him. He set the box down slowly, pulse steady. He wasn't stronger in the muscular sense, but he felt supported, as if something inside him was carrying part of the load. That evening, he stood before the bathroom mirror again. It had become ritual. Observation. Confirmation. Under the harsh light, he examined his shoulders carefully. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. But when he rotated slightly, angling his body to catch the shadow, he saw it. A faint ridge along the back of his scapula. Not swelling. Not inflammation. Structure. He pressed gently. Beneath muscle, something solid traced the inner edge of his shoulder blade. Not the original bone. Offset. Like a duplicate forming behind it. His breath slowed. "It isn't replacing me," he whispered. "It's assembling itself." He turned sideways. Examined his pelvis. Another faint internal ridge along the iliac crest. He bent forward slowly. No pain. Just subtle tension. As if a framework was anchoring deeper into his hips. Preparing. For what? The question lingered in the quiet room. Preparing for weight. He returned to the studio that night. The booth felt unchanged. Foam walls, dim lamp, microphone waiting like a silent witness. But when he sat down, the chair felt different. Smaller. He adjusted slightly. The seat groaned faintly beneath him. He had not gained visible mass. He had not changed clothing size. but his internal density felt increased. He began recording. "Tonight," he said calmly, "we're discussing adaptation." He let the word hang. In medicine, adaptation refers to structural change in response to environmental demand. Muscles grow when stressed. Bones thicken under load. Click. Soft. Beneath his left shoulder blade. He did not flinch. "Wolff's Law," he continued. "Bone remodels in response to force." Another subtle shift along his pelvis. His posture straightened involuntarily, as though the body anticipates weight before it arrives. He paused, listened. The silence inside the booth was complete. But beneath his skin, movement, not frantic, not chaotic, deliberate reinforcement. He leaned forward slightly toward the microphone. "What if," he whispered, "the body is adapting to something we cannot yet see?" Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. After the recording ended, he remained seated, still, waiting for 3:17. His inbox had quieted slightly. The initial surge of listener reports had stabilized. But a pattern had emerged. The clicking among listeners now occurred less frequently. Instead, many described feeling stronger, more balanced. One message read, "I don't know how to explain it, but my back pain disappeared after the second click." Another, "I feel like I'm standing differently." The phrase repeated across messages. Standing differently. Adrian closed his eyes. He felt it too. A redistribution of force. His body no longer sagged into gravity. It pressed against it. At 3:17 a.m. he was ready. He expected the usual subtle click. Instead, a deep, resonant shift rippled through his pelvis. Stronger than before. His hips locked into alignment with a firm internal snap. He inhaled sharply. The sensation traveled upward along the secondary skeletal lines, reinforcing, thickening. Then, silence. His body felt heavier. Not externally. Internally. Denser. He stood slowly. Walked to the center of the booth. Tested his stance. The floor beneath him felt distant, as though his mass extended further downward. He placed both hands against his hips. Beneath muscle and skin, the new structures were no longer faint. They were solid, supporting. He looked at his reflection in the darkened studio window. His silhouette appeared broader, grounded, built, and that was when the thought arrived, not as fear but as clarity. This wasn't disease. Disease weakens. It degrades. It consumes. This, strengthened, reinforced, optimized. Adaptation implies environment, pressure, demand. What was coming that required this kind of reinforcement? He returned home just before dawn. The sky outside his apartment window held the faintest gray edge of morning. He stepped inside, paused, and felt it immediately. A downward pull. Subtle, persistent, as if gravity itself had intensified slightly. His knees bent reflexively. The new structure inside him absorbed the force. Stabilized. He looked at the ceiling. For a fleeting moment, he felt as though something immense hovered above. Not physically visible, but implied. Weight waiting to descend. His spine did not tremble. His pelvis did not strain. The secondary skeleton held firm. "It's building for weight," he whispered into the quiet apartment. The phrase felt inevitable. And as he stood there, perfectly balanced under unseen pressure, He understood something deeply unsettling. Adaptation never occurs without purpose. If his body was reinforcing itself, if his listeners were standing straighter, if bones were thickening and organs were shifting for better support, then something was coming, something heavy enough to require preparation. And whatever it was, his body seemed confident it would survive it. The question was, would the rest of him? Chapter 8. The autopsy recording they told me to delete. The package arrived without a return address. No postage stamp from a courier service he recognized. No sender's name. Just a small padded envelope slipped beneath his apartment door sometime between midnight and dawn. Adrian noticed it when he stepped out to collect his mail. It lay flat against the hardwood floor of the hallway, unassuming, light enough to be ignored, heavy enough to matter. He stared at it for several seconds before bending to pick it up. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and someone's overcooked dinner from the night before. Ordinary, safe. The envelope was not. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No explanation. Just data. He closed the apartment door slowly behind him, slid the chain into place, and stood in the center of the room. His body felt balanced, reinforced, ready. Beneath his ribs, a faint tightening. Anticipation. He moved to his desk and inserted the flash drive into his laptop. One file. Audio only. No title. Just a date stamp from 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks ago. Before his first scan showed structural growth. Before listeners began hearing it. He hesitated only a moment before pressing play. At first there was static. Then the faint ambient hum of fluorescent lights. A voice followed. Male, middle-aged, professional but strained. Beginning autopsy at 02:43 hours. Subject is male, approximately 37 years old. Cause of death currently undetermined. A rustle of fabric, the metallic clink of instruments. Adrian leaned closer to the speaker. The voice continued. External examination unremarkable. No signs of trauma, no contusions, no fractures visible. A pause. Then, internal examination commencing. The recording shifted slightly, a suction sound, the wet, clinical noises of procedure. Adrian's breathing slowed. He had listened to autopsy recordings before. They were methodical, detached, academic. This one was different. There was hesitation in the coroner's voice. Ribcage exposed. The man said quietly. A longer pause. That's unusual. Metal tapped bone. Adrian felt something stir beneath his own ribs. Subject presence with. The coroner stopped speaking. Silence stretched. The faint hum of the room filled the gap. Then the voice returned lower. There appears to be additional structure. Adrian's pulse slowed. The coroner cleared his throat. Beneath the primary ribcage there is secondary calcification, parallel alignment, incomplete. The words landed with clinical precision. Additional structure. Parallel alignment. Incomplete. Adrian's fingers tightened on the edge of his desk. It isn't replacing me, he whispered. It's assembling itself. The coroner continued, voice now unsteady. The secondary formation is denser than expected. Density readings suggest advanced mineralization. It does not appear pathological. A faint scraping sound echoed through the recording. As if it was meant to support something heavier. Adrian's breath caught. The coroner lowered his voice further. The second one was denser. The sentence was almost a whisper. The recording crackled slightly, as if the microphone had shifted closer. There are indications that the primary skeletal structure was beginning to degrade, microscopic fractures, subtle erosion, but the secondary formation shows no weakness. Silence again. Then faintly, a click, not from the recording environment, from the body on the table. Adrian froze. The coroner froze too. On the recording, his breathing became audible. "That's impossible," the man muttered. A metallic instrument dropped onto the tray with a sharp clang. The recording cut abruptly. No conclusion. No official cause of death. Just silence. Adrian sat motionless in his apartment. The refrigerator hummed faintly in the kitchen. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Ordinary sounds. But inside him, movement. A deep, resonant tightening along his pelvis. Up through his spine. His shoulders locked back involuntarily. The new structure inside him felt affirmed. Validated. He opened a browser window. Searched hospital records for unexplained deaths matching the date on the file. Nothing. No public records. No news reports. No obituaries with suspicious language. He contacted Dr. Sethi discreetly, referencing an anonymized case of dual skeletal structures. Her response was immediate. "There is no such case on file," she wrote. "I would know." He pushed further. Requested internal pathology logs. A day later, he received a curt reply from hospital administration. No records exist of the case described. The phrasing was careful. Exist did not mean occurred. Just that nothing remained. He returned to the audio file. Played it again. And this time, he noticed something he had missed. Just before the recording ended, beneath the coroner's strained breathing, there was a second sound. Subtle, wet, structural. A faint internal click. Not from tools. Not from movement. From the body. From the secondary skeleton. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. His own internal framework responded with a quiet tightening beneath his ribs. Not violently. Just confirmation. Hours passed, though outside, the day faded into gray. He stood in front of his mirror once more. Examined his shoulders. The ridges were more pronounced now. His pelvis felt heavier. Anchored. His reflection stared back, posture perfect. Balanced under invisible pressure. He imagined the body on the autopsy table. Incomplete structure. Denser secondary formation. Primary skeleton eroding. The second one was denser. Denser implies longevity. Durability. Replacement not through destruction, but succession. He swallowed slowly. If the secondary skeleton was stronger. If it was building for weight. If it was meant to endure. Then what was the first one for? Practice. Prototype. He felt a sudden downward pull. Stronger than before. His knees bent slightly. The reinforced framework inside him absorbed the force easily. He did not collapse. He did not tremble. He remained standing. Perfectly aligned. His phone buzzed softly. A new message from an unknown number. One sentence. "You weren't the first." His heart shifted slightly further left. A smooth internal slide. Not painful. Just placement. He stared at his reflection. "It isn't replacing me," he whispered. But even as he said it, he felt the truth settling deeper. It wasn't replacing him. Not yet. It was preparing to outlast him. And somewhere in a hospital archive, a file had been erased. A body had been buried. and a denser skeleton had been sealed inside a coffin. Still incomplete. Still assembling. The question that lingered in the quiet apartment was not whether he would survive the process. It was whether the original structure, the one he had always called himself, was meant to. And as night pressed heavier against the windows, his secondary skeleton tightened its hold, ready for weight, ready for permanence, ready for what was coming next. Chapter 9. My reflection is standing straighter than I am. The first time he noticed it, he blamed exhaustion. Adrian had not slept more than 2 consecutive hours in days. His body no longer seemed to require it. The reinforced framework beneath his bones held him upright without complaint. Fatigue felt optional. But the mind still frayed at the edges. That was what he told himself when his reflection blinked a fraction of a second too late. It happened in the bathroom. Late. The apartment silent except for the faint hum of city traffic far below. The mirror above the sink glowed under sterile white light. He stood barefoot on cool tile, hands resting lightly on the porcelain edge. He inhaled. The reflection inhaled. He exhaled. The reflection exhaled. Perfect synchronization. He leaned forward slightly. The reflection leaned forward, but a beat slower. So subtle it could have been imagined. He froze. The reflection froze. For a moment, they stared at one another. Then, click, deep beneath his left shoulder blade. The sound was faint, structural. And in the mirror, his reflection's posture corrected first. Shoulders drawn back. Chin lifted slightly higher. Straighter than he was. His breath caught. He adjusted his stance. His body followed. But for that brief, undeniable second, the reflection had been ahead of him. It wasn't pain, he whispered. It was placement. But this was something else. This was sequencing. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. He did not turn away from the mirror. He tested small movements. A tilt of the head. A slow roll of the shoulders. A shift of weight from one foot to the other. Every motion was mirrored. But not perfectly. There was a delay. Not enough for a casual observer to notice. Enough for him. The internal structure responded each time. A faint click. A subtle tightening. As though recalibrating to match what the reflection had already done. He stepped back slowly. The reflection remained perfectly aligned. Balanced. Centered. As if gravity affected it differently. He swallowed. He knew how mirrors worked. Light reflection. Neural processing. Fatigue-induced misperception. He could list explanations for hours. But none explained the synchronization of internal movement. He lifted his right hand abruptly. The reflection lifted its left. A split second before he fully extended his fingers. He jerked his arm back. The reflection followed instantly this time. No delay. He stepped away from the sink. Turned off the light. Darkness swallowed the room. His pulse remained steady. Not racing. Steady. As though the second skeleton inside him was unconcerned. The next morning, he tested it again in daylight. Sunlight flattened distortion. Natural light erased shadows. He stood before the living room window, the glass reflecting his outline faintly against the bright city beyond. He shifted his stance. The silhouette straightened more than he had. He rolled his shoulders forward deliberately. The reflection resisted, remaining slightly back, as if maintaining optimal alignment. He felt it then, a deep internal shift along his spine. The secondary framework tightened. Click. He inhaled sharply. The reflection's chest expanded first. His body followed a heartbeat later. "It isn't replacing me," he murmured. But the phrase felt incomplete now, because replacement implies reaction. This felt like preparation. He returned to the bathroom, turned on the harsh overhead light again, stared into his own eyes. There was no visible change. Same face, same features, but the posture in the mirror, uncompromising, stronger, balanced in a way he no longer quite matched. He slouched slightly on purpose, just to test it. The reflection corrected immediately. Standing tall, he remained slouched. The reflection did not. His breath hitched. A low, structural grinding echoed inside his pelvis. The new skeletal ridges along his hips pressed outward, reinforcing. He slowly straightened. The reflection's shoulders lowered slightly, as if satisfied. A thought formed slowly. Cold. Precise. "It's not rearranging me," he whispered. "It's rehearsing." The words felt heavier than anything he had said before. Rehearsal implies sequence, practice, preparation for an eventual performance. He stepped closer to the mirror, close enough that his breath fogged the glass. The reflection did not fog. Its breathing was measured, controlled, perfect. He leaned even closer, their foreheads nearly touching. In the faint distortion of condensation, he saw something subtle. The faint outline of ridges beneath the reflection's shoulders appeared more pronounced, more complete, as though the secondary skeleton inside the reflection had progressed further. His stomach dropped slightly. Inside his own body, a tightening ripple traveled upward, as if reacting to the observation. He placed his palm flat against the mirror. The glass was cool, solid. The reflection placed its palm against his, but its fingers seemed slightly longer, straighter. He blinked. The distortion vanished. Normal again. His phone buzzed from the counter. A new message from a listener. "I swear my reflection looked taller." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the reflection's chin was lifted slightly higher than his. He did not move. He watched. Slowly, the reflection lowered its chin to match him. But he heard it first. Click. A smooth internal slide along his spine. His posture corrected involuntarily, matching the reflection. He stepped back abruptly. The reflection stepped back, perfectly aligned, always aligned. He turned away from the mirror, walked into the living room. The apartment felt heavier now, the air denser, as if the unseen weight he had sensed days earlier was drawing closer. He stood in the center of the room, closed his eyes, tried to feel his original skeleton, the one he had lived inside for decades. It felt thinner now, less dominant, like scaffolding being gradually phased out. The secondary structure bore more of the tension, more of the load. "It's not rearranging me," he repeated softly. "It's rehearsing." Rehearsing for what? He turned slowly toward the dark television screen. Its black surface reflected him faintly. In the dim outline, the reflection stood impossibly straight, immovable, as though rooted into the floor. He bent his knees slightly. The reflection did not. He felt it then. A deep downward pull, stronger than before, as if gravity itself had increased again. His reinforced pelvis absorbed it. His shoulders locked, his spine aligned. The reflection did not struggle. It had already adjusted. He understood then. The reflection was not delayed. It was ahead. His body was catching up. The secondary skeleton was not reacting to his movements. It was synchronizing him to something already set, already perfected. He walked slowly back to the bathroom, turned on the light one last time, stared at himself, at it, and in the quiet, sterile glow, he whispered the truth that had been assembling alongside the bones beneath his skin. It's not rearranging me. A faint click beneath his sternum. It's rehearsing. The reflection's lips curved upward, just slightly. Not a smile. Not quite. But an acknowledgement. And as he stood there, perfectly aligned under increasing unseen weight, he realized something chilling. When the performance began, only one of them would be ready. And it wasn't the one made of the original bone. Chapter 10. The final scan revealed who will be left standing. By the time the hospital called him back in, Adrian already knew what they would find. He could feel it. Not as fear. Not even as anticipation. As weight. The unseen pressure that had been building for weeks now felt closer to arrival. The air itself seemed denser. Sound carried differently. Even footsteps echoed with a deeper resonance against pavement. When he entered the hospital, the automatic doors slid open with their familiar sigh. The smell of antiseptic greeted him like an old colleague. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. He walked without hesitation. Balanced, grounded, reinforced. The receptionist did not make small talk this time. They led him directly to imaging. No waiting room. No television murmuring in the corner. Just quiet efficiency. The technician who had once smiled politely avoided eye contact now. Full scan, she said simply. Adrian lay on the narrow table. The machine loomed above him, circular and white, an enormous mechanical iris preparing to open. He folded his hands over his chest. He could feel both frameworks beneath his skin now. The original skeleton, lighter, familiar, subtly strained. The secondary structure, denser, confident, almost complete. The table slid inward. The machine began its rotation. A mechanical whirl enveloped him. Inside, a deep synchronized tightening. Click, click, click. Not random. Layered. The sounds overlapped, two sets of architecture adjusting in parallel. He felt it clearly. The original skeleton resisted slightly. The new one did not. The scan ended. He sat up slowly. No dizziness. No weakness. But something inside him felt distant. As if his limbs were connected through memory rather than immediacy. The consultation room was dim. Dr. Sethi stood beside the illuminated screen, hands clasped tightly. She did not greet him. She turned the monitor toward him without speaking. Two skeletal structures filled the display. The primary skeleton, his original bones still visible. But thinner, subtly porous. Hairline degradations along the ribs. Microfractures along the vertebrae. And beneath it, the secondary skeleton. Nearly complete. Denser. Perfectly aligned. Except for one detail. The two structures did not match. They overlapped slightly out of phase. The new spine ran just behind the old one. The new ribcage curved slightly wider. The pelvis sat lower, as if waiting to take the full load. Dr. Sethi swallowed. The density readings, she began quietly, show significant mineral reinforcement in the secondary structure. Adrian nodded slowly. And the primary? She hesitated. There's degradation. How much? Enough. Silence settled heavily in the room. He stared at the image. The faint lines that once seemed like artifacts were now unmistakable architecture. "It isn't replacing me," he murmured reflexively. But the words rang hollow now. Dr. Sethi looked at him carefully. "Adrian, do you feel less attached to your limbs?" The question hung in the air. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused inward. On his arms, his legs, his hands. They responded when he commanded them. But the sensation felt slightly delayed, as if the signal traveled through two frameworks. He flexed his fingers. They moved, but not with the same ownership as before. "They feel," he said slowly, "lighter." She nodded faintly. Some patients with dissociative conditions describe similar sensations. He almost smiled. "This isn't dissociation." He stood from the chair. The downward pull intensified, stronger than ever. The reinforced pelvis absorbed it instantly. His original knees trembled slightly. The new framework did not. He felt it clearly now. The original skeleton was no longer bearing full weight. It was sharing it, and losing. Hours passed, though outside, the sky darkened into evening. He returned home in silence. The apartment felt smaller again, compressed beneath unseen pressure. He stood in the center of the living room, closed his eyes, listened. Two rhythms, two structures. The original bones emitted faint microcracks under strain. The secondary framework held firm, supporting, dominant. He walked slowly to the bathroom mirror, turned on the light. The reflection stared back, straighter, more defined, the ridges beneath its shoulders unmistakable. He lifted his arm. The reflection lifted its corresponding arm, perfectly synchronized. No delay now. He slouched slightly. The reflection did not. A deep grinding ripple echoed along his original spine. Pain flickered briefly. The first true pain he had felt since this began. The secondary skeleton tightened. Locked. He straightened involuntarily. The pain vanished. His reflection's posture softened, satisfied. "It's not rearranging me," he whispered. "It's rehearsing." But rehearsal implies eventual execution. He stepped closer to the mirror, pressed his palm against the glass. The reflection's palm met his. Its fingers felt aligned with strength. His felt optional. A sudden, violent crack exploded inside his chest. Not from the secondary structure. From the original. A rib. Hairline fracture. He gasped. The new rib beneath it absorbed the force instantly. No external collapse. No visible break. Just an internal handover. The original skeleton was failing quietly, piece by piece. And each time it did, the secondary one slid closer into place, overlapping, replacing position, not by tearing away flesh, but by waiting for weakness. He staggered back from the mirror. His reflection remained upright, unmoved. He felt it then, the final truth assembling with terrifying clarity. The new skeleton was not building around him. It was building through him, waiting for the old structure to crumble under increasing weight. The weight he had sensed, the pressure descending slowly over days. It was not external. It was inevitable. Evolution demands replacement. He braced himself against the sink. Another microfracture along his original spine. Pain. Sharp this time. The secondary spine locked into alignment. Pain vanished. He stood upright again. Perfect posture restored. He looked into the mirror. The reflection no longer seemed a head. It seemed complete, fully assembled, waiting. And for the first time, he understood the question had never been whether he would survive. It was which version of him would be left standing. A deep, final crack echoed from within his pelvis. The original bone splintered subtly. The secondary structure expanded, solidified, seamless. He inhaled. No obstruction, no weakness, just density, permanence. He placed his hand over his chest. His heartbeat still shifted left, still alive. But the cavity around it belonged to something stronger now. He stared at his reflection one last time. "It isn't replacing me," he whispered. But the truth finished the sentence for him. It already had. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside the apartment, inside his body, the secondary skeleton locked fully into place. And when the unseen weight finally settled, only one structure bore it without strain. Only one remained perfectly upright. And in the mirror, it was not the one made of the bones he had been born with.
Closing chapter.
The human body replaces cells constantly. Skin sheds, blood renews, bones regenerate. We are not as permanent as we believe. But what if something else understands that? What if the body is not failing? What if it is upgrading? I began this story believing something was wrong with me. Now I understand something far worse. Something inside me has been patient, measured, precise. And if you've been listening closely, if you've leaned in during the quiet parts, you may have heard it too. That soft click, that subtle shift. Check your ribs. Stand still. Listen carefully. Because once you hear your organs move, it means it has already started. If this story unsettled you, subscribe. Because next time, we're going deeper under the skin.